Hello, everyone. Welcome to One Mind Brainwaves, a weekly forum where we discuss the psychological challenges we all face in the world today, with conversations with leaders in the mental health field about brain science and real lived experiences about mental health. I'm Brandon Staglin, schizophrenia survivor and president of One Mind. Thank you for joining us. And don't forget to post your questions online. If you've been feeling anxious or worried over the past several weeks, you're not alone. Anxiety is on the rise in our society during the pandemic. With an unprecedented amount of concern about health and about the economy, both men and women, a majority of both men and women report increases in their levels of worry and stress and fear in their lives. And anxiety can, of course, be really debilitating. I've experienced this over decades in my life. It can prevent people from being calm and centered and affect your mood, your sleep, and your ability to just interact with people in ways that are meaningful and satisfying. So there is hope, fortunately. There are proven strategies to help us all cope with the anxiety we're facing today. We have two leaders in the mental health field to talk about this and about how fostering compassion for yourself and others can really help manage the anxiety we're feeling today. We also have a great singer-songwriter, and I'll introduce the three of them in turn. Dr. Michelle Craske is the Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry at the University of California in Los Angeles. Hello, Michelle. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And absolutely. Dr. James Doty is the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, and also professor of neurosurgery at Stanford University. Thank you, Jim. And also, Mr. Peter Meyer is an amazing singer-songwriter who is one of my favorites of all time. And he's here to, at the end of the show, perform his beautiful song, Japanese Bull. Thank you, Peter, for being here.
Thanks, Brandon.
You bet. Great to see you. So let's get right to it. So, Michelle, let's start with your personal story. When did you first decide you wanted to dedicate your life and your career to the study of depression and anxiety and helping people deal with these conditions?
Certainly. So I actually grew up in a family where my older brother, Ian, suffered very, very severe emotional problems from a very young age. And what I observed as I was growing up was not only the suffering that he experienced, but also my parents. Because at that time, which was many years ago, there were very, very few resources. They were, really struggling to find a way to help him. And most of my time growing up, which was a very, warm and loving environment, but nonetheless, the center of the conversation was, how do we help Ian? And so without consciously thinking of it, I'm sure that directly impacted my interest in going into psychology and trying to understand what are the factors that put people at risk for anxiety and depression, and how can we develop treatments that are more effective than what currently exists, and then how do we make these treatments accessible to everybody who's in need. And so that's what I've been doing over the last 30 years of my research. And most recently, that's resulted in being a co-leader of the UCLA Depression Grand Challenge, which is an enormous initiative with a grand endeavor of aiming to cut the global burden of depression in half by the year 2050.
That is amazing to think of that prospect of half the depression in the world gone and replaced with perhaps joy, calm, balance, what remains after people start to feel better. So it comes from your personal experience, your passion for this. So that's great to hear that. We have that in common. Yes. May I ask how your brother is doing these days? Is he all right?
He is not. I mean, he passed away. He was hospitalized for many, many, many years and passed away at the age of 53. It was just very, very difficult, yeah. But my sisters and myself, so both of my sisters and myself, were all in the mental health area and working to try to help others and families, people who are surrounding those who are suffering as well.
Thank you, Michelle, for sharing that. Sorry to hear about your brother, but really impressed with the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Well, UCLA has launched a great website online resource to help people with their mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'd like to ask, you're an expert in that area as well, managing anxiety during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
Spoken about it in many appearances. Where are we all collectively right now, and what are some tools and strategies we can use to manage our anxiety and worry during this time?
Right. Yes, where are we indeed? I mean, this is just so unbelievable in so many ways. But when we look at the mental health condition, so to speak, of the nation or of the world, clearly there are many people who are, first of all, in shock and experiencing high levels of anxiety around multiple domains, whether it's worry about the health of themselves or their loved ones, worried about going back to work or finding work, worried about financial stress, worried about opportunities that have been lost and will never return, or the loss of loved ones. And so multiple different arenas where there's reason to be anxious or worried or stressed. And of course, we have to recognize that that's completely normal. This is unheralded times of uncertainty, and it's normal to be anxious or stressed and worried in these times. And so the COVID-19 care package that you mentioned is something that we've put together and that we continue to develop as our needs as a society evolve over time throughout this pandemic. But the care package starts off by emphasizing 5 strategies. We call them the 5 C's, which are really about how in the moment to manage some of this that we're going through. And briefly, I'll mention them. The first is to stay connected, because we know that social connection is one of the most fundamental ways of coping with stress. The second is to focus on things you can control in this environment of being out of control. So that might be taking care of your health. It might be doing things at home that you couldn't do before. The third thing is staying calm. And so doing things to calm the natural physiological stress response, which can include meditative mindfulness or yoga or even exercise. The fourth thing is cutting the news, we call it, which is not to ignore the news, but to maintain a healthy balance between being informed versus being overwhelmed. And the fifth, and the one that's the topic really for today, is caring for oneself and for others. And so practicing both giving and receiving kindness. Because we know, and Dr. Doty will talk more about this, I'm sure, about the science around compassion and how it can actually lift mood, reduce the stress and anxiety. And of course, it has that ripple effect outwards, where when we show kindness to another person, it engenders them to be more likely to show kindness to others. And certainly we're in need of that right now.
Thank you, Michelle. It's so important to hear that. So this leads us right into my next question for Jim. Jim, your passion lies in nurturing mental health through fostering compassion for oneself and others, and altruism. What first led you to want to dedicate your career to study compassion as a source of mental health, and how did that come about?
Well, in some ways, it's related to what Michelle was speaking about, because who we are today is usually a manifestation of our past and the influences of our past. And in my own situation, I grew up in poverty. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had had a stroke when I was a child and was partially paralyzed, had a seizure disorder, chronically depressed, attempted suicide multiple times. We were on public assistance essentially throughout my entire childhood, evicted from homes. And of course, now we have the research associated with what we call ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And when you have mental health issues, drug and alcohol abuse, poverty, violence, these have a huge impact on the ability to succeed in life and to be able to attend. Now, the great thing, though, is that that can change dramatically with the influence of one person. At the age of 12, I was angry, in despair, had a sense of hopelessness, had a great deal of anger, a great deal of shame. And at that age, interestingly enough, I walked into a magic shop. Thus the title of the book, which is Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to understand the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. And what happened in that magic shop was that there was a woman who it turned out knew nothing about magic. She was the owner's mother, and she was sitting there reading a book while he was running an errand. But what this allowed us to have was a conversation. And if you've met somebody who has a radiant smile and an incredible presence, it makes you feel safe. And the other thing about her was she interacted with me in a non-judgmental fashion and treated me like I was an equal. And all of those things made me feel safe. And she actually asked me some penetrating questions. And you have to remember, this was before we had the term mindfulness, neuroplasticity, et cetera. And after we spoke for about 20 minutes, she said to me, she said, I really like you. I'm here for another 6 weeks. And if you show up every day, I think I could teach you something that could help you. And what she did, in fact, and we spent a couple hours a day together for 6 weeks, she taught me a mindfulness practice. She taught me how to do what's called a body survey now, to relax the body, and a breathing technique. And because the reality is you cannot succeed unless you can attend and be present. Because in those types of environments, which my own, speaking about, it's like you're in a war zone all the time. You never know what's going to happen next. So you're always wondering versus being present and calm and relaxed. So she taught me that. And then what she taught me was that I had an ongoing negative dialogue in my head, which I believed was truth, where I would say, I'm never going to succeed. I'm not worthy. I'm a failure. I have no hope of doing anything. And what she made me understand was that, unfortunately, as a species, how we evolved, negative things have a tendency to stick to us much more than positive things. And there's certain survival instincts that we've acquired through evolution where there's a purpose for that. But unfortunately, in this context, it's not helpful. And so she made me realize that that was a false narrative. And it was a narrative that was resulting in me giving away my power, if you will. And so what she taught me was how to change that narrative from one of self-criticism, negativity, to one of self-affirmation, one of self-compassion, one of feeling I was truly worthy of love and acceptance. And as a result of changing that narrative, it had also a dramatic effect. Because when you're in that space, it's all about you. And you forget that so many other people are suffering. And the other thing that happens is, as a species, we have this incredible ability to intuit people's emotional states from facial expressions, body habitus, voice intonation, even smell. And when you are frightened, when you're afraid, when you're angry, people respond to that. And what I tell people is that from what she taught me, I changed how I reacted to the world, and the world changed how it reacted to me. And that allowed me that different perspective, that understanding of other suffering, allowed me to connect with their suffering, but it also allowed me to understand that I was worthy of living in this world and of having success, and that interaction with that woman truly changed the trajectory of my life.
Amazing, Jim. Thanks for sharing that story. And it's amazing how just one person in our lives can be such a mentor and such a and really change the, this flow of how we're moving down our path in our life. I had a friend like that, multiple people in my life, most recently a friend named Robin, and he had schizophrenia too. He passed away recently, but I'll be talking about the story about how he helped me kind of change my perspective on the experiences that I had that really helped me ultimately feel whole again by reinterpreting my past. And I'll talk about that at the Never Alone Summit, where we'll both be speaking this weekend. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jim. It's fantastic. And your book, your New York Times bestselling book, is called Into the Magic Shop. As you said, a neurosurgeon's quest to understand the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Which would you say is more important for mental health, the brain or the heart?
Well, it's interesting because at the end of my pool, I have a statue, and it's a modern art interpretation of a Buddha, and it doesn't have a head, and it is holding a persimmon. And I picked that with great intention because oftentimes we get lost in our head and we forget our heart. So I would suggest to you that your heart is the most important aspect of this, because it's with your heart that you truly see the world. Oftentimes with your brain, you get so involved in the cognitive aspects that you start thinking too much versus following your heart's intuition. And I always say your heart is your compass. And if you follow that, it'll take you in the right direction. The other thing I mentioned is this Buddha is holding a persimmon. And what this reminds me of is, if you've ever eaten a persimmon, it starts out bitter and hard, and over time it becomes soft and sweet. And in some ways, it's the nature of suffering. Some of the greatest things we learn in our lives is with suffering. It's not with getting things, not with achievement. It's suffering, and first of all, understanding the strength that we have, learning resilience. And when we have a negative experience, over time, if we look back on it, for many of us, it's the greatest lessons and wisdom that we have learned in our life. The other aspect of it is that it reminds us of the nature of equanimity, this idea of evenness of temperament in the face of the ups and downs of the world. So while it's wonderful to get accolades and to achieve, getting lost in that results in suffering in and of itself, because you always want that. That's the nature of attachment. But also thinking that the downs are going to be forever is also wrong, because they're never forever, generally speaking. And like I said, oftentimes we learn incredible things from those experiences. And in fact, in some ways, they're gifts.
Indeed. John Denver had a beautiful song, Seasons of the Heart, about how even our hearts are something that kind of go through cycles and it never stays the same, and something to look forward to, as whether it's for more pleasant or less pleasant in our lives. Experiences are all valuable. I believe that. So thanks for your wise words. Michelle, you've also studied the effects of kindness and compassion on mental health. What have you found?
Right. Yes. So we've noticed for a long time that when people are feeling anxious or depressed, the tendency is to become very self-focused, and because of the state of worry and rumination and the negative self-talk that Jim was talking about. And that often leads to social isolation and withdrawal, which unfortunately cycles back to increase the sense of anxiety and depression. And what we've also understood from a lot of work in the mindfulness literature, that engaging in compassion and kindness can actually help lift moods and draw people out of that negative internal cycle. And it's interesting, over the years, up until the work that we've done, actually, most of the treatment programs that have been developed for anxiety and depression primarily have focused on how do you reduce the negative emotions? How do you help people get out of the negative state by directly targeting negative emotions through various techniques? But what we've started to employ and tested is how do you actually improve the positive emotions? And these two are not exactly the same. They exist in slightly different worlds. They have different biological structures supporting them. So we've focused on what can you do to help a person who's feeling down and very negative towards themselves learn to savor and anticipate positive experiences in a way that's going to lift them up. And so we use compassion training, generosity, gratitude, appreciative joy, and kindness as tools to help people who are feeling down to actually look outward or to themselves, but in a more positive way. So an act of self-compassion might be a little bit what Jim was talking about, actually, is that idea of accepting that I might be feeling stressed or anxious or irritated in the moment, to label that emotion, to recognize that's part of the human condition, or that lots of people are feeling that emotion, and to ask oneself, how do I help myself right now with this emotion? What do I need to say to myself to be compassionate towards myself with this negative emotional state, which might be, may I be strong, may I be forgiving, may I get through this. Just a little example, an act of kindness might be reaching out and actually offering to help somebody else who seems to be having a struggle right now, a helping hand. And in our research, in randomized controlled trials, where we can compare that approach to the standard approach, which is all about how do you reduce the negative, we find that this focus on the positive actually gives us better results. So it empowers, it's an empowering state to feel like you can help somebody else. It gives you a sense of agency, and it's inherently more positive to feel like you're doing some good. And so that's where our research has taken us. And we've also looked at what are the effects of engaging in those kinds of compassionate and kind acts in terms of neural functioning and brain functioning. And just starting that line of research, but showing early signs that when we train people in those ways of being compassionate and kind, it actually does have both a psychological and a biological impact on their functioning. So it's very, very promising, I think.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And at UCLA, in the Depression Grand Challenge, are you implementing some of these techniques with the students there as part of the...
And we are. So for the UCLA Depression Grand Challenge, we have a program of making treatments more widely accessible, given the really incredible increase in the rates of anxiety and depression in the young adult age group. So we've developed a scalable model of treatment, and that compassion and mindfulness is part of that treatment. We've also now expanded this compassion and mindfulness-based approach to high school students who themselves are at risk for anxiety or depression because of various factors in their backgrounds and their lives growing up, and using compassion-based mindfulness to help them build their resilience so they're less vulnerable to actually developing problematic levels of anxiety and depression.
That is so powerful. What an approach. That's amazing. So today we're talking about managing anxiety and finding compassion with two leaders in mental health, Dr. Michelle Craske, who's distinguished professor in the departments of psychology and psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles, and Dr. James Doty, who is the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University. Thanks for watching, everyone. And remember, you're welcome to ask questions during the premiere of this episode. Please do. So, Jim, some might say that the coronavirus crisis has brought out the best and the worst in ourselves as humans. What can we do as a society to promote more altruism and caring for one another?
Well, I think in some ways this is a choice between fear and love. And what I mean by that is when we're anxious and afraid, of course, this stimulates our sympathetic nervous system, which is part of our autonomic nervous system. And the nature of that both has brain effects and peripheral physiologic effects. The brain effects are that your executive control area is shut down. You are in survival mode, so you're trying to limit, or your choices end up being limited because you don't have access to information that can be helpful to make more discerning and thoughtful decisions. Of course, your heart rate increases. You have a decrease in heart rate variability, which is a negative effect on your heart. Your blood pressure goes up. Your immune system's depressed. You actually have the increased expression of inflammatory proteins. So it has this immense amount of negative consequences. And when you're in fear mode, what happens is you shut down. You don't see connection to other people. You have a tendency to connect with only those people in your close group or your tribe. And certainly on the savannah in Africa, when we lived in groups of 10 to 50, that was a wonderful strategy. But in the modern society, it's not helpful. And as a result, this allows people to be manipulated. And I would hate to say, but it's true that politicians have a tendency to take advantage of this. With fear narratives, it results in tribalism. It's this view of us versus them. It creates more anxiety and it creates more fear, and it allows people to be manipulated and go against other people. The other choice is love. And this is understand that we're in this together, that the greatest source of our strength as human beings and the greatest source of our ability to thrive is when we connect with others, when we look outward, when we embrace the other, when we care for others. And when that happens, it has an extraordinarily positive effect on our physiology. You have access to your executive control functions, which allows you to use memories, past experiences, information that has been imparted to you to make more thoughtful, discerning decisions. Your peripheral physiology is actually boosted. This is your best state. Again, your immune system's boosted, your cardiac functions improved. In fact, over the long term, your telomeres are lengthened. Is that right? Lengthened? Yeah, are lengthened. And actually, it's wonderful for your health. And it's interesting, there's a book by Viktor Frankl, who some of your listeners have probably heard of. He wrote a book called Life's Search for Meaning. And he says, there's stimulus and there's response. And the fear response is the immediate survival mode response. And yet the best response is a more measured response. And this is the pause before the response, once the stimulus has occurred. And in fact, what he says is there lies your freedom, right? Because when you take that pause, when you think about the situation, frankly, the fear that we have for many people is actually bigger than the event itself. You see, it's the anticipation of something that you don't know about or feeling you don't have control, and it creates all these mental narratives. When you step back and you realize most of these situations are often not as we actually think they are, and frankly, in 99% of situations, this too will pass. And so you have to sit with that and understand it. But it does take some work. The other thing I would comment on is, one of the things that causes human suffering is attachment, because you want something, right? And you're grasping at that. And that is obviously not a good strategy. Now, if you can go down your path and not have attachment to the outcome, you limit your suffering. But the other side of this is, in fact, I say it's the other side of the coin. It's the not accepting events. It's avoidance. And that's just as troubling, because, when you deny the existence of reality, like you say, oh, I hate this, my life has changed because of COVID. I refuse to accept this. In fact, it's like a form of grieving. You go through this denial, you go through all the stages of grieving, but at the end of the day, you have to go to acceptance. When you accept something, then you can create a plan. And when you're able to create a plan, then you can solve a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great insight. I've talked about this before, but for years I resisted the idea that I had schizophrenia. I thought I can't have this horribly stigmatized mental illness. It can't be me. And when I finally accepted that I had this illness that I'd probably have to deal with the rest of my life. It made life a lot easier. I could move on and engage in things that I cared about and reach out and make more relationships and things. And I have to credit Ellen Sachs and her book, The Center Cannot Hold, My Journey Through Madness, for inspiring me to do that. Thanks for sharing that, Jim.
Well, and it offers you liberation, right?
Yeah, indeed. Acceptance, liberation. Yeah, thank you. Michelle, as states open back up, many people are going back to work, but unfortunately, the unemployment rates remain sky high. What do you suggest for people who would like to seek help for their mental health but are afraid to do so, that they're afraid it might put their jobs at risk and anxious about that?
Yeah, so I think that's an important question because it's touching on the issue of how does society view mental health nowadays? And, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go still. Unfortunately, there are still some people who have negative beliefs about people saying that they're suffering from depression or suffering from anxiety or having one form or another of a mental health problem. But it is improving, as I said, and certainly in younger age groups, we're seeing the greatest rate of improvement. So that means that for future generations, it'll be, we're looking forward to the time when people can talk about their mental health in the same way they talk about their physical health. When I grew up, I mentioned I grew up in a family where my brother had severe problems. We could not mention it to anybody. We had to keep it completely quiet. It just was not to be talked about whatsoever. Nowadays, it's much, much better than it was back then. But I think the reality is there is still a tendency for some people to have negative beliefs towards mental health issues. So for the person who themselves are needing help, I think it's important to have that acceptance that you mentioned, where you can accept for yourself, I'm having some difficulties. That's part of being kind to yourself. That's a compassionate way of being, that I'm having some difficulties. To recognize that reaching out for help is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of failure of character. It's a sign of strength. And that there are now ways of getting help if one is really concerned that doesn't have to involve declaring, I need help, but you could actually seek help through various approaches such as online therapy programs, which have been shown to be as effective as seeing a clinician who can deliver therapy. So there are lots of options that are now available to people. But to embrace the idea that you just discussed, that acceptance of one's situation and the value of reaching out to get help can really do remarkable things in opening up pathways that you wouldn't normally even be thinking about.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's extremely important to understand, that if we need help and we feel like we need help, we can reach out and seek and ye shall find. A lot of those speakers speak about that too. Thank you. And then the idea about changing the conversation about mental health in our society,
Right.
helping people feel more open to speak about it is kind of something that some of these online major events that are going to take place in the very near future are going to talk about. One of these is the Never Alone Summit, taking place May 22nd through 24th online. And Jim, you're going to be a speaker at that, so will I. It's a free global mental health event, live streaming May 22 to 24. 22 to 24. And one of the questions we'll be exploring is how these times might give us a chance to mold our world into a better place. What are your thoughts on that?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Jim, yes.
Well, I think hopefully what it does is the nature of how this COVID-19 has impacted individuals and stressed individuals. People who have thought of themselves as strong or not needing any help or not having any mental health issues, I think hopefully it makes them understand that all of us need help sometimes. This is the tragedy is in modern society, especially as we see more wealth inequality, individuals are afraid to show any type of weakness or to show they can't compete. And as a result, this affects their ability, if you will, to be authentic because they're afraid of being judged. Mm. And it's interesting, oftentimes when I give talks, there are certain things I'll talk about that are emotional for me. And my voice will crack or I'll shed a tear. And, you know, when you're able to be open and upfront like that, my experience repeatedly has been people don't judge you. The nature of who we are as a human being is you want to embrace that person and care for them. That's how we're wired. And because oftentimes when I will show my emotion or shed a tear, the audience appreciates that and suddenly they're all crying because that's where we want to be. We want to connect with that emotion. One time I was giving a lecture and a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, I felt so sorry for you. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, your voice broke and you shed these tears and it must have been so horrible for you up there and to be so embarrassed. And now here's the interesting thing. She says, you know, I'm a psychiatrist and a hypnotist. And if you come visit me for 3 sessions, I'll get rid of that. No. Actually, that's what allows my talks to be powerful because they connect with people. They show our humanity and they show that we're all suffering and they allow people to be themselves, to be who they really are and not worry about being judged. You know, it's interesting. Google did a study and it was on what makes successful teams. And in some ways, this relates to this conversation. And as you may or may not know, when Google started, they would only hire the top 5% of 15 universities because the founders, frankly, probably have some degree of Asperger's. And in their view, this academic performance is the critical determinant of success. But as they grew, they acquired more companies, more employees who did not fulfill this criteria. So they spent $50 million over multiple years. It's called the Aristotle Project to say what makes successful teams and leaders. Now, do you know what academic performance, how it related to success of a team or a leader?
Pretty low, yeah.
Domain experience, nothing. What determined the strength of the leader was authenticity, vulnerability, non-judgment, creating a safe, psychologically safe environment, allowing people to try and fail and not being critical of them. And this is the same in life. When you live a life like that, when you can interact with people and give them that gift, that allows people to thrive. And it's interesting, you know, you can create an environment, a fear-based environment or a love-based environment. When you create the love-based environment, people are more creative, they're more productive, they're more balanced, and frankly, they're happier.
Indeed. Thank you, Tim. That's gold to hear. That's really so valuable for leaders to hear. And I subscribe to that 100% as a leader at One Mind. So thank you very much. Michelle, we talked a lot about, all the three of us here today, about ways that we can, things we can remember and practice to help hang on to optimism and be healthy in this challenging world. What words of hope would you like to offer as a final word to our audience today, based on all we've talked about?
I think based on actually a lot of the things that we've already discussed, just recognizing that humans are pretty darn amazing animals, that we have capacities to do things that sometimes we don't even realize, and that our bodies are really built to handle stress. And we've shown resilience time and time again, and that it's actually possible to navigate even exceptionally challenging situations like this one that we've never ever seen before by just focusing on, sort of the right style of coping, the things that Jim's been talking about with leading with your heart, with love rather than fear, with embracing and accepting ourselves. And the normal sort of adaptive coping strategies and including in there seeking help if you need help. and that with that approach, we can get through this. We can navigate our way. We'll make it.
Hear, hear. Thank you. We're stronger than we think. Thank you so much, Michelle. And that, by the way, is the name of another major online event, which will take place May 27th through 29th, streaming online on major platforms such as Facebook and Twitch and Instagram, in which I'll participate. And One Mind will be one of the major participants, along with many celebrities, musicians and entertainers and scientists, including Michelle. You'll be part of that. So thank you very much. So please keep an eye out for that, viewers. So Michelle and Jim, thanks so much for your wisdom today you've shared with us, and your authenticity. Been so valuable. Viewers, thank you too. If you have any questions for follow-up, you can visit onemind.org/brainwaves, where this recording will be posted. And there'll be a comment section open where you may ask questions, and perhaps Jim and Michelle can check there over the next few days to see if there's any questions posted there. And for more information about anxiety and depression, please visit the Anxiety and Depression Association of America's website at adaa.org. Or if you need immediate help, you can call the Disaster Distress Helpline at 1-800-985-5990, or text "Talk with Us" to 66746 to connect with a trained counselor. Thanks very much. So now we have a treat for everyone. We're joined by a very talented artist who's finely crafted, soul-soothing lyrics have inspired audiences for decades. We have Peter Meyer, an inspirational musician who's inspired me in ways that have changed my life, I have to say. Peter, thanks so much for being with us, and welcome to Brainwaves.
Thanks, Brandon. It's great to be here. Thank you. You
bet. Your work is very philosophical, with its themes about the universe and spirituality, and even everyday things, life, humanity, the natural world. And what inspires you to write about these themes in such a deep and meaningful way?
Well, I guess life itself inspires me, and I've really appreciated the thoughts of Michelle and Jim and you, Brandon, about compassion and caring for one another and connection. I think that for me, the word connection, seeing myself as connected to everything there is. I mean, the universe, the story of the universe we know now is that we were all there in the very beginning in that tiny microscopic singularity that then exploded into existence, a universe. And it's very mysterious, and I think it's very spiritual and profound to think that we are all made of the same stuff, and that we are all in very real ways one. We are one, many and one. And so that really excites me as a human being, and certainly so. Then as a musician, I try to wrestle with these ideas in song, and it's a fun challenge, but it's exciting to think about, I think, at many levels for me, about just being connected to everything.
Thank you. And sharing that basis for your songs there is very gives me perspective and reinforces my perspective that I've learned in part from your music, over the years, about how just seeing that perspective, you remember that is the truth, and that there's more to the world and ourselves than we see in the day-to-day, noise of the media and so forth. And so it's very healing to hear your music. Thank you.
May I add something to that? That you said that is the truth, and I think it is the truth. But it's a subtle truth. It's not readily apparent, the ways that we are connected, even though they're very, very compelling ways. But they're not necessarily ones that we always sense or navigate on a day-to-day basis. And so I think that, an aspect of any spiritual practice, I guess you would say, that one ought to have, is to remind ourselves in whatever ways that we can that we are connected. And there's age-old practices that help us remind ourselves of that aspect, of that dimension of who we are too, because the other dimension, the separateness, that seems more natural, I think, to us in many ways and more apparent. So I think a good spiritual practice would also include that sense of oneness and constant daily reminders. We are one, we are connected, we are all part of the same fabric.
That's great. That's great. We can learn from this COVID pandemic in ways that can help us or can change our perspective on things. I think we've all been transformed in different ways by the pandemic. Do you see things differently due to this crisis we've been going through?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, who doesn't really? It's been an amazing experience, and I am sheltering at home with my kids. My girls are 8 and 12, so we're doing a lot of homeschooling and trying to stay healthy, trying to stay active, trying to get outside. Doing the things that many of us in the world are doing just for our own mental health, right? Staying connected to the world, to the earth, and to each other as much as we can. But even last night, I thought it was really interesting what you all were saying about connection to others being such an important source of health and happiness. And just last night, my 8-year-old daughter, who really thrives on her friendships and relationships at school, she just collapsed into tears, saying she just misses her friends so much. And so we were huddling today as a family, trying to figure out a way to create a play date, sort of a socially safe play date. So anyway, yeah, it's a challenge, but it'll definitely be memorable for all of us, I think. And hopefully we will bring good things forward from this, good awarenesses, good habits, and perhaps a deeper appreciation of community.
Yeah, it's great to hear your family comes together to support each other that way. That's heartwarming to hear that. Thank you. Your song Japanese Bowl from your album Heaven Below is about fostering self-acceptance and self-compassion. This is a very inspiring song to me and to so many people. Why do you think it resonates with audiences so well?
Well, it's simply because of the metaphor that I use, which is the art of Kinsugi, which I was very touched to hear you, Jim, how much you knew about Kinsugi. Wow, Kinsugi is a perfect metaphor. I mean, it's a real art form, and just to briefly describe it, Kinsugi is a tradition in Japanese pottery that begins with a broken vessel of some sort, a plate or a bowl, and you then try to glue it back together, but you don't try to put it back together in a way that makes it look like it hasn't been broken. Instead, you put gold in the glue, and then in the end, you have something that not only do you see the cracks, they're very obvious, but the cracks are beautiful. And wow, what a beautiful lesson in life. That is just, what do you need more than that? Just to embrace your brokenness. You talked about acceptance, accept, embrace, and not only that, but go a step further. Say it's beautiful. Go even the deeper route and see its beauty. That is just so wonderful. So all I did was take the metaphor and try my best to write a song around it. But I really think it is the metaphor and seeing that bowl in your mind. That's where the power lies if one finds it in this song. Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you, Peter. And I have to say, I am like one of those Japanese bowls, I think we can all say. And you expressed that so beautifully just now in your description of Kinsugi, but your song expresses it even more beautifully. So can we please hear your song?
Thank you. Yes, of course.
Thank you.
There's always has to be tuning. You'd think I ought to have been tuned up by now. Okay, bear with me for a second.
Sure thing.
Okay, well, listen, you can just try to imagine what it's supposed to sound like.
I can easily do that.
All right. I'm like one of those Japanese bowls that were made long ago. I have some cracks in me. They have been filled with gold. That's what they used back then, when they had a bowl to mend. It did not hide the cracks. It made them shine instead. So now every old scar shows from every time I broke, and anyone's eyes can see I'm not what I used to be. But in a collector's mind, all of these jagged lines make me more beautiful and worth a much higher price. I'm like one of those Japanese bowls. I was made long ago. I have some cracks. You can see how they shine. Of gold.
Thank you, Peter. Man, I was so moved by your performance. That's just so beautiful to hear. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Peter.
Thank you.
Yeah. Song is so meaningful to hear. Peter, really appreciate you being on One Mind Brainwaves today. It's been an honor to work with you today and hope to connect with you again soon.
Likewise, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure in so many ways. So viewers, thank you for watching. I hope you'll visit us on Brainwaves again next week, where we have another great episode featuring Amit Paley of the Trevor Project and musician Mary Gauthier, who perform her song Mercy Now. And one other guest we are hoping to get as well. So thanks for watching, everyone, and take care.